survey. Years of dynamic, and we will see how the attitude to the judiciary changed in this society. We do that in partnership with Razumkov Center with their sociological surveys. We are grateful for this partnership. For that, no matter what, people come to courts accept them, and we're grateful to representatives of the Supreme Court, to other courts who meet our interviewers without interfering. The other way around, they support them. And thus, we have this study that is not just a poll. This is a study that shows what people actually think, and these are people who have been to court. Interviewers met them in courts. And also what these people think about the judiciary as well as other authorities. So there is still significant level of distrust. In Poland, we see that 57% of respondents do not trust the judiciary, only 36% trust. In France, 32% trust courts, and only 4% of those have full trust in courts. Only 5% of people in France say that they absolutely happy with how the judicial system functions in their countries. There is a specific situation in the US. There, more than 60% trust local courts, while most of respondents do not trust the Supreme Court, and only 35% trust it. But this is about the local context, because there the Supreme Court is always under criticism from mass media, while local courts study showed that only 11% have had that experience, 89% don't have that experience. However, their opinion also matters because it impacts the situation in general. There is the so-called Thomas theorem, according to which even an insufficiently competent opinion matters. Thomas mentioned that even if perceived facts or imagined facts are perceived as reality, they impact real trends, actual trends. So even a non-competent opinion matters. Besides, as we see based on experience, and this is what we teach to students of sociological departments, public opinion is not a sum of individual thoughts. When we conduct polls, we see the stereotypes that exist in the information space of the society, and thus answers of the respondents reflect not so much their own opinion, but rather the information context and the stereotypes that were developed without engagement of those individuals. And also we surveyed those people who were living courtrooms. These were about immediate experience of individuals, of their interaction with courts, and their general assessment of their experience of dealing with the judicial system. So if we speak about their experience, direct experience, we can see that those people who, during the national survey and during the courtroom entry surveys, well, when asked whether the decision of the court was fair in their case, the both surveys show that most respondents say yes, that's 70%, 71% in the national survey, but that's 71% of those people who have the experience of participating in court sessions. While regarding the courtroom surveys, most of those people said that the decision was fair. And also, we can see that these responses do not change much each time as we conduct the study, even though we see that there are still more compared to 2020. We see that in 2020 there was 66% during the courtroom exit. Michaela, I will help you with timing. So the national, that's those people who didn't have the experience with courts, and that's 63%. The first slide, this is the participants of the national survey, that's 62.5%, who said that the decision would be fair. And these are participants of the study who have had experience of dealing with courts. And 70%, 71%, these are participants of courtroom surveys. Okay. Among them, 71% believe that the decisions were fair. And now, which factors create this opinion? We see that 45% of the respondents in the national study say that their ideas about courts are only created based on information in the media. And obviously the media include not just newspapers and internet media, but also social media. So that proves again that it's not the personal experience of respondents, but the impact of mass media, and that's what creates public opinion. The differences between the two studies can be seen quite clearly, where they answer the question whether judges are dependent or independent. In the national study, this is about all participants, no matter whether they have the experience of dealing with court or not. So here we can see that most people questioned during the national survey believe that judges are to a certain extent dependent in their decision making, while most of those who answered in the courtrooms believe that they are independent. So we can see that these data are significantly different. Let us stop here. Judges are fully independent, and we see the dynamic of that this proportion is increasing, right, every year. Yes, and even based on data of national surveys, we see certain positive dynamic there, even though it is not that significant. But the main difference is that those people who have their personal experience of dealing with courts, they see the situation in a different way. I would like to attract attention of the audience to figures. 34.7% said that judges are dependent, but now it is 11%, right? No, sorry. Yeah, that's my mistake. So it was 14 and 11, right? Judges are fully independent. First figure is 10, second figure is 13. And these are surveys and courtroom exits. Okay, let's move on dynamically. So evaluating different aspects of work of courts. Again, this is the national survey, and we see that most people do not have experience of dealing with courts. However, they believe, well, what they needed to assess the situation from 0 to 6, where 0 was the option on the left and 6 on the right. And according to this scale, most respondents believe that functioning of court in Ukraine is not understandable, and judges work slowly, and costs of access to justice are too high.
If you look at the people that were polled and those who don't have any experience of being in court, they said that their positive experience prevails over negative, and the numbers here are higher in comparison with those people that didn't have any experience of being in court. When answering the question, what are the judges guided by when delivering court judgment, then here in comparison with 2020, we see the increase in the numbers of those who believe that they are guided by law, 17 versus 13. In the previous survey, there are more people that believe that the judges are guided by the circumstances of the case, 16 versus 11 previously. In comparison with 2020, out of 35 to 26, there is a decrease of those that believe that judges are guided by their own interests and profit. So the dynamics and the trend is positive, but if you look at the negative side of the story, for instance, when judges are guided by material interests when delivering judgments, instructions, political reasoning, then anyways, in the national survey, negative opinion prevails. So the cumulative effect of negative indicators that have an impact on the decision of the judges prevails over the positive ones. Let's move over to trust to courts. Generally speaking, during the war, public trust is strong in Ukraine when it comes to the institutions that are in charge of the defense of the country. The trust here prevails over distrust. The same goes for the president of Ukraine because he is the commander in chief. But when it comes to trust to other authorities, here we see that the public trust is mainly low. That includes judiciary, as we see the share of those who do not trust uh, judiciary makes 56%. The same goes for the prosecutor's office, a little bit lower numbers, but it's there. The same for the Supreme Court, and the same goes for anti-corruption authorities. National Anti-Corruption Bureau, that's an interesting situation. The data of the service show that in July, August, when there were many people that came to streets to protest against limiting powers of the National Anti-Corruption Bureau, and many people, most of the people supported this protest. But at the same time, if you look at the balance of trust and distrust to NABU, so the negative balance prevails there, despite all this um, protests. So negative balance of trust and distrust doesn't mean that it is everything when it comes to the attitude to specific institutions. If you look at the dynamics, we see that even given the data of the national survey, we see the decrease in the negative aspects there. We see that the balance of trust and distrust is on the improve. If you compare that with 2020, then there is a 9% improvement in the balance of trust and distrust. So that means that the share of those who trust uh, judiciary increased by 9%. That's basically the same for most of the state authorities. With the beginning of full-scale invasion, we see the increase of the level of public trust to basically all public authorities, though let me repeat what I was saying, that there is a negative trend or the negative balance when it comes to the comparison of trust is trust to all authorities. As to the trust to judiciary, and that's the answers of those who were polled upon leaving the court, then contrary to the national survey, the attitude to courts and judges is positive. So positive prevails over negative. National survey shows that it's only 17% of the polled that have trusted to the courts. So upon leaving the courts, the level of trust is 54% versus 37 of those who do not trust. As to local courts, the difference is even higher. The level of trust here upon leaving the local court is 57%. Do not trust 32%. We polled people live in local courts and district courts and courts in oblast, but positive assessment of local courts expand further over to the courts of higher instances. For instance, the Supreme Court, that's the national survey. The level of trust is 23 versus 59.5 that do not trust. And if you look at the polling of those who left the court, 46 versus 29, that's the indicators there. The first is level of trust. Psychological effect matters here when positive attitude to the court of one level expands over to the positive attitude to other courts that the respondent was not in touch with and doesn't have any experience. According to the national survey, that's an interesting thing. If you look at the level of trust to courts, and the question was, have you had any experience of being in court in the course of the recent 2 years? In 2020, the survey of living court showed the positive balance of trust to courts. According to the national survey, therefore, those people that had court experience, similarly to any other respondents, expressed negative attitude. So sometime after court experience, people give positive experience, but a little bit later they forgot what they said before and give negative uh, assessment of the work of courts. That means that information space has much more effect on the attitude in comparison their personal experience, and that also shows that their personal experience is not that important in comparison with what they see in media. If it is, for instance, traffic accident that the person had, so they believe that it is not that important in comparison with the high-profile corruption cases that are covered by media outlets. And things that are linked to it is the question about the level of corruption in courts. And if you look at a national survey and survey upon living the courts, so the respondents agreed that judiciary is corrupt. They agree with this question, but it's not really linked to the assessment of the level of the corruption of judiciary, but according to respondents, they believe that the entire system in the country is corrupt. When we assessed the level of corruption of different institutions, it turned out that the respondents believe that all institutions are corrupt, including judiciary. So the attitude to judiciary and level of corruption there is an integral element of assessing political system in the country per se. And it's not only about Ukraine, that's typical of other countries as well. In France, the level of public trust to power very low, and it determines low level of trust to judiciary. So in other words, it's not the fault of judiciary in all the instances. Just given this assessment, most of the respondents uh, supported changes in the judiciary system, and they believe they are more pertinent than in 1920, though it's only 13%, 22% believe that these changes are not there, but most of the respondents did notice the changes, but most of the people do not follow that. Most of the people are keen on having changes, but they are not really interested in that. Those that were pulled up on leave in the courts noticed changes more. It's 21% versus 13 of the national survey results. If you look at those who notice changes in the judiciary, they believe that they are positive. 48% that have noticed the changes believe that they have been positive, and 13% believe that they are negative. Those polled upon leaving the courts, the results are more optimistic. 59 of those who noticed the changes believe that they were positive, and 12 believe that they are negative. I guess that's what I had the time for. So, Latif, you're kindly invited to express your comments. The participants, you are invited to participate in the comments. But I have the first question. How can you explain that in the first slide we have 63, 70 respondents said that my decision were fair and based on law. And then we see negative dynamics. At the same time, they say that I do not trust judiciary. When you talk about the trends, I would say that there are positive trends in most of the indicators. Even if there are negative responses, the dynamics is positive in comparison with the previous years. Even if it is negative today, it is less negative than it was before. My question was different. How the person can say that my decision was fair and based on law, and at the same time, when answering the question whether you trust judiciary, they say no. That's what I was trying to explain. Apparently, there is some influence of information that the person receives from media. So these information that the person receives regarding the level of corruption in high-profile cases, and the information about some judges. Um, this information is believed to be more important than the personal experience of a respondent. If you look at the general context, we can say that information received through media is believed to be much more important than the personal experience of a respondent, and therefore it shapes the opinion by judiciary per se, not about specific judge or specific case that the information is about, but about the judiciary per se. If you talk about the attitude towards judiciary, it could be dependent on the negative attitude to the power in the country per se. We see even lower level to legislative branch of power, and it's hard to imagine with low level of trust to legislative branch of power. It's hard to imagine having judiciary as the one enjoying a high level of trust. You had a question, no comment rather. How can you explain a negative level to the high anti-corruption court in December and February when they were just about to be set up? So the body was not up. It was 2018. Yeah, that's exactly what I was trying to say. That's the body that was being set up within the system of power that had negative attitude. But the body did not exist that. Well, people were not interested in that. So that's what I was trying to say. All the reports for those years were open, and you can look at the question. The thing is that the body has been set up. No, it was being set up. I guess the question was phrased differently. You cannot add that the body was being set up. At least it existed on paper. But that's an interesting point, because as soon as you include any type of power into the questions, the answer is immediately negative. Victoria Krasnova Association of Lawyers of Ukraine, as to the source of information for people, for respondents. That's slide 3, official sources. This year, 5% of people go to official sources, and the previous years have not been mentioned here. So you didn't include this, or they didn't go to official sources. We didn't have this question in the previous surveys. Andrei? What's the correlation of the number of people that received the decision in their favor with the number of those who are happy with the work of courts? That's an interesting correlation. You can clearly see that with the respondents that were polled upon leaving courts, if the decision was in their favor, then most likely their answer regarding the decision would be that it was fair. If it was against their interest, then they would be likely to say that it wasn't fair and it affects the level of trust. If the decision was in their favor, they would show higher trust. But even if they have unfavorable decision, but they believe that it was fair and legal, then they show 50% of public trust to courts. So they show trust to the court. But again, that's the respondents who were pulled upon leaving the court.
Would the figures change on the first 2 slides regarding legality and fairness of the decision if we ask the citizens about fairness of the law that applies? And why I'm asking that? Because I have lots of doubts that any kind of ordinary citizen understands the concepts of fair trial in the context of the European Court of Human Rights, and also often fairness is about punishments, right? So, of course, where we have these discussions about higher sanctions for stealing in the situation of the martial law, there we see that not everyone understands why for something when somebody steals like something for 4,000 hryvnias, it's possible that the imprisonment period will be 5 years or so. So in Western Europe, it is more, it is better understand. But here, people don't understand why this is 5 years of imprisonment as sanction for that. I mean, if in sociological surveys, we should simultaneously ask about the legality and fairness of the laws, right? Because judges are governed by the law. Well, we had this discussion whether we had to separate legality and fairness, because, but we still decided to discuss those together because etymologically these are close words. In Poland, the Ministry of Justice is basically the Ministry of Fairness, if you translate that word. This is not the same thing. I see what you mean. I think that it would not have changed significantly because in perception of the public, these are very close concepts. Let me tell you that we are holding the next sociological survey, but among defense attorneys, prosecutors, and maybe there it will be relevant because professionals can separate legality and justice. Because for ordinary people, this is about whether they like the process, the attitude. And as you start asking professional questions, we see more of those who say hard to say because immediately they start thinking about like what's expected, what does that mean. Other questions? Thank you. Since there are no more questions, let's go back to the slide about the European Court. Ukrainians, well, they measure the degree of trust in the European Court. The degree of trust in the European Court is higher. And again, this is among things about that the degree of trust in European institutions is high. So it should not surprise you. And this is a proof of that trust in judicial authorities is associated with degree of trust for certain judicial system. If Europe has the positive image, then obviously the European Court for Human Rights will also have a positive image. 55 trust that and 28 don't, right? 29 don't trust. Okay, and there was also European Court in previous slides. These are the same data. The first one, this one, this is the same thing. This is the national study, right? These are people who have not had, most of them did not have individual contact with courts. And basically, most of them did not have experience of interacting with the European Court. So then I ask you to follow, to go to the audience. So we can see that the trust in European Court is huge. And I invite the judge of European Court, Mr. Latif, how it's going to be convenient for you. And you will have like 7 minutes for everything. What can can you tell us about trust? Good morning. It's a very difficult question. First, I've been in court for 9 years, and this is the first time that it's hard for me to answer a question, basically. I believe that the topic is too general, but also I thought, when you suggested that I talk about that. We mentioned the European Court. What are the reasons for that people may not trust courts? The European Court refers to various situations and scenarios when it was about when the trust for judges was at stake. Independence, impartiality, obviously, where judges, how they are appointed, objective parameters, technical competence, and integrity. So the court said first, in one case against Iceland, when the Minister of Justice appointed his guys instead of those candidates who passed the selection procedure. And that is what happens in Iceland, even not only in our place. So the court said that, of course, the trust in the judicial system is at stake there. So after the case of Hominiuk versus Ukraine about irreplaceability of judges, and then the situation where decisions of judges are not implemented, that also has an effect. Other situations. So the European Court is an independent court. I believe that's quite obvious. And there are subjective and objective criteria. So what the criteria are: election, the parliamentary assembly, that's very serious, very objective, impartial. Maybe there is the issue regarding execution of decisions, of court decisions, but that's not the problem of the court, because it depends on how the states implement our decisions. And why 27 or 30% of people in Ukraine do not trust the European Court? That's a question. So I can think about that, almost 90% of decisions, they do not undergo a filter. For example, 100 applications, so 95% of them are inadmissible. So maybe those people who are rejected at the first stage, maybe that creates this perception that there is no trust in the European Court. Maybe the word court is a trigger historically. Maybe that's kind of legacy issue. So to me, personally, that's a question. To what extent this opinion is an objective indicator to measure trust in judges. Yesterday, the president of the Supreme Court was right, saying that we have objective indicators. People go to first instance, and then what happens then? Do they go on, or they believe that that's a fair decision? So how many decisions reach the Court of Appeal or the Supreme Court? I believe that that's the criterion. That is an objective indicator that shows objectively the degree of trust. Can I ask a question there? Whether court, including European Court, needs to really be very much concerned about that. Imagine routine work of judges. Judge goes to work, so should they first thing, should it be the first thing that they do to check the poll figures? And how is that supposed to influence work of judges? Well, maybe that would be incorrect to say that, but well, there may be polls, they may write about me, and that won't be a significant indicator for me of that I necessarily need to change something. I don't think about that because I said that there are objective indicators and there could be different reasons for others. And as I mentioned, independence, right, I understand that. Corruption, various situations of judges, but 27%, I don't know how to explain this 27%. Why 27% of people in Ukraine do not trust the European Court? Maybe it's possible to ask judges whether in the professional community it would be possible to hold the survey if judges themselves trust the judicial authorities. Like a doctor, would they do some self-treatment or they would address their colleagues for help, right? Or would go abroad to European Court, right? Yeah, there have been a lot of applications. So when I was the single judge for Ukraine, that was significant. And there, the role of Mr. Gusenov is very obvious. And by the way, when was that? Now I believe that the indicators are higher. By the way, I can answer this question why. Why negative attitude in this negative attitude in the Ukrainian community? I believe it is, but this is about defense attorneys because they complain of long period of judicial consideration and failure to enforce the decisions. Yeah, duration, that's an issue. And unfortunately, the European Court, we were 160,000 and now it is 62,000 applications that are pending. And people have to wait for 10 to 15 years, even more. Of course, that has an impact and affects efficiency. If you don't mind, we are supposed to end now already. There is a comment there. So what could we address to Ukrainian judges regarding the issue of trust? Alexander? Thank you, Mr. Latif. I don't think that you should undertake responsibility for the 27% because these figures, that's about the general European trend. If we look at, well, before the Catalan crisis in Europe, the court that was trusted most was the Spanish tribunal. After the decision on Catalan, there was significant deterioration of this attitude. And the US, you mentioned the Supreme Court that in the recent 15 years as a positive situation regarding the trust, but not in the recent years. What has changed? That happened even before Trump. So what is that about? What are these figures about? I believe that we live in very interesting times, indeed, times of distrust. That's a general trend. We need to take that into account, but we need to look for ways to also counteract it. Thank you. The floor is yours. Yeah, I agree with that. So the judge of Constitutional Court, Mr. Vadyanikov, has commented on that. So there is there are lies, there are statistics. You need to know how to read statistics. But when we speak about trust in judicial authorities regarding the processes that are happening, that's not just statistics. That's a basis for resolute action. So we call on everyone to be guided by the polls to some extent. And you know that now we have lots of information about various branches of power, and that could even influence public authorities. So, but this is an impartial study to the degree that it is possible. But anyway, we need to interpret the figures in the adequate way, and you need to read the full report. We will publish it soon. You are welcome to read through the full text. And of course, we will try to improve our approaches if there were any errors or faults, because the next survey, next study is going to cover professional groups, and then we will go back to this format of the survey. Thank you, Latif, and we proceed with the next session. While we have this rearrangement process here, let me address you. You are a journalist with huge experience. What do you think about the figures? I am ready to suggest the version about 27% of people who do not trust the European Court for Human Rights. Let's go back to 1991, and one of those nice myths that we supported, that 90% of Ukrainians voted for independence. Actually, that's wrong, because 90%, this is 90% of those who participated in the voting process, and that was 80%. So that's about 75% of those who voted for independence. So hence you have the 25% that for various reasons didn't catch up, but someone didn't go there in order not to vote against that. Then, during our period of independence, this trend, this figure remained more or less unchanged regarding the vector towards Europe to Russia, multi-vectoral standing. And then you are surprised that we have that many people in that category, but we kind of hushed that down. But why Russian agents? Why there are those who try to avoid the army service? So that's my version of the 27% for whom the word European by default means something evil. Now I invite Vitaly Orkevich, Secretary of the Grand Chamber of the Supreme Court, Yaroslav Yurchikhin, Head of Committee, Parliamentary Committee on Freedom of Speech, Olga Denkovich, Assistant Professor of the Department of Law of UCU, and the person who yesterday impressed us and with the word "remember that you are human," Yevhen Buderatsky, Deputy Editor-in-Chief of Ukrainska Pravda. Mr. Yurchishin is going to catch up, right? So, since there is no Yurchishin so far, my first question sounds ambiguous because I wanted to have this blitz survey. Who do we lack among participants of the panel discussion? But now the answer is obvious. Imagine that Yaroslav Yurchishin is with us already. And then my question is, who do we lack to discuss this topic? And who and how forms the trust in court?
Since Yurchishin came last, he's going to be the first to respond. Who is missing among these panelists? Who could be the fifth one to discuss this subject matter? 30 seconds. Any effective judge speaker who explains court decisions would be good to have. Ulhadenkevich, representatives of civil society and large public, maybe just an ordinary citizen. Yevhen Buderatsky. I support representative of civil society and Vitaly Urkevich. Good morning. Defense lawyer, professional community is missing it. It would be good to have a defense lawyer to discuss trust in courts. Different opinions, I would add another one. It seems to me that media is understood narrowly. We limit it to mass communication, but literature, cinema, theater, that's media too. And it seems to me that many of you could recall the movies about courts and judges that existed in this shameful Soviet time. Even in the Caucasian prison, there was this let the court live alone. That's the most humane court in the world. And other movies where everything was beautified in the movie. The US movies, for instance, Judge Judy, where they keep showing court hearings, etc. So it seems to me that we need to pursue a broader perspective, but that's the time when everybody and one will have 7 minutes to come up with the bullet point comments to have the exchange later. Vitaly, you are the first to start. Who shapes trust in judiciary? It seems to me that there are many stakeholders here, and let me start with judges. It's judiciary itself. It's very important to have them because the way the justice is administered is important. Everybody wants to get a fair based on the law decision that would be clear, but the conditions under which the decision is made is very important. The person who happens to be in the courtroom should understand that it is a state institution that is the most important in our country. The person should have the guarantees that the treatment could be fair and the procedure applied would be in line with the highest standards. It's difficult to provide all of this under uh, the conditions of war, especially if it is war affected areas, regions, but we are trying to do that too. Who else has an impact? That's lawmaker, legislative power, but I would add here through lawmaking. Yesterday we had good examples when we have laws, legal regulation, we have what we have, but the final outcome is with the court, and everybody is saying, okay, so the court made unclear decision. Why was it made this way? Because the court is governed by the laws that we have affecting our country. Every judge has this feeling, the feeling of justice, and should understand how to deliver the decision in line with the principle of rule of law. But the law is a roadmap for us, and we are guided by the law first. The second or the next one is executive power. A recent example, I remember that it was advice of the minister, a high official, who said that we are not going to enforce the decision of the administrative court because it's wrong. It's the one that I don't like. Later, it was kind of refuted by him. He claimed that he meant something different, but that's a kind of a ironic situation when the decision of the court that is binding for everybody on the territory of our state can be questioned by representatives of other branches of power. And we have instances in administrative cases when the pension fund who is clearly aware of the position of the Supreme Court and the way that the decision should be enforced, but they sort of force every person to go to court and get the decision with the name, and then only then they say, okay, we can consider enforcing it. It seems to me that since the situation is not a one-off case, but repeated, we should do something about that. The next is judicial self-governing authorities that have an impact on that. We have High Council of Justice, that's the constitutional authority that is there, and we expect open and timely work of the council as to appointment of judges, their careers, their punishment, if it is necessary and deserved, so that citizens realize that none of the abuse or misconduct will go unpunished. Who else has any influence? When you ask this question, who is missing? I said defense lawyers, because the opinion of professional community and the opinion that is publicly expressed is very important. It is less typical of prosecutors, but when it is defense lawyers, some of them afford ungrounded, uh, unconstructive criticism, just either to get clients, or that's a kind of hype. But very often reasoning of the court is different from what they claim. But at the same time, the interviews, features in mass media is quickly disseminated among the users, and then it leads to the opinion, oh, again, this court, again, this and that, etc. As to level of trust and the numbers that were presented today, it seems to me that's important numbers for us. We should remember about this. The judges to perform the work qualitatively, but we do not work in a vacuum. We work for the sake of the society to be able to understand what it is all about and why this or the other decision has been delivered. The survey that was conducted is one of the most important steps given our EU accession path. You know that in May 2025, Cabinet of Ministers approved the road map on the rule of law, and there is one of the items there, and it is the Supreme Court that is in charge of it. That's having annual study regarding the level of trust to all courts, and selective with respect to 10 courts. That's an important step as step number one, because I think after that we'll ask European experts uh, whether everything was done properly, whether the questions were phrased properly, and the results and the effects in the European countries, what were they? And then we'll work on improving our work, and we would have this studies as systemic. Yaroslav Yurchishin, 7 minutes. Yesterday, there was a lot said in one of the panels. It was said that the court delivered the decision, and the information was disseminated not from the decision, but the information was taken from one of the bloggers. And there was a phrase said, we had to dismiss it or to defute it. Responding to manipulation is losing the game. Very often we lack high quality type of communication between the court, not the judge, but the court or the judge speaker proactively, so that the ground is lost by those who could potentially uh, would be willing to manipulate court decision and present it differently from what it was. Naturally, the element of proactive effective communication wouldn't by default increase public trust because there will be always a lost party who wouldn't be happy with the decision. But it would um, create this clear understanding that nothing is hushed up. Now there is better understanding of what Ukrainian court is among Ukrainian citizens. Those children that went to um, a court on a tour, well, they had the image of 12 angry men, um, regarding the court. So that's a deliberation room, that's the courtroom. And when they were explained what is what, that was a very positive element because judges are the ones that create an impression of the court. Naturally, the interaction with opinion leaders and journalists is of crucial importance. It doesn't guarantee, though, that it's going to be an easy type of work, but communication will secure understanding. I had an experience where I was the head of the committee and I was approached by the project officer that helped to develop communication strategy for the judge speakers regarding the work of court. And I was surprised that it was only judges speakers who did that. They didn't engage journalists, they didn't engage civil society. And at the end, when we organized the meeting of journalists with the judges, that was kind of, complete resistance at the beginning because somebody said, okay, you have to ask us first before providing information. And the journalists were saying, well, our task is to provide information. If you did not give this information to us, we'll find it. So both have complementing functions. And thanks a lot for organizing this event because they will bring us together. They are an eye opener and yeah, well, journalists start realizing that if it is the judge that has just delivered this decision, cannot come up and talk about it, but interaction and communication develops the relations of trust. These were good numbers that those who had court experience trust courts more. So we needed to talk more, we need to interact more, and we need to talk more to those who uh, deliver this information to us. Thank you, Olga. You have 7 minutes. Uh, no, in your way of moderation, let me start with the most important things and then I will give the details. I will try to focus on three elements. Trust in courts is shaped in context given uh, public changes or changes in the large public, and you have to take that into consideration. Now we see long-term prospects. We see changes 2017, 2024. We shouldn't expect quick results. And thirdly, to change the numbers, you have to influence the root causes. So, and this require in-depth analysis. In other words, we need to answer the question if 70% believe that it was fair decision and at the same time 73% of people do not trust courts, then uh, why why the perception of court is like that. As to the context, we are into the third year of the war and hierarchy of Ukrainian priorities remains stable. The first ranking is peace, second ranking is justice. So, and naturally that creates pressure on judiciary because there are high expectation to courts. Therefore, any error, whether that's a delay in court proceedings up to uh, not really profound reasoning of the decision uh, adds to this and undermines the trust to court. If you add um, excessive workload, a shortage of judges, we would have the picture where allegedly judiciary is the only system that is in charge of meeting this demand for justice. Let's take a look at other countries that have very good post-conflict periods and look at the transitional justice. We know that there are extrajudicially institutions, illustration. We have archives, restoration of truth, commissions of truth, and these tools were there, and we need to discuss them with large public and the civil society. As the tools that could be used to restore justice. The second element of contextual nature is the changes of postmodern society and the way the authority is shaped. The position of a judge, unfortunately, do not give authority to a judge because authority is shaped through personalities under the influence of digital environment, information under the influence of the news and facts covered by media outlets. And we happen to have that the trust to judiciary per se for the specific person is associated with a specific judge. So the conduct of a judge it does have an influence on the level of trust to judiciary in general. As to long-term perspective of shaping trust to judiciary, I would look at two models of shaping trust to any state institutions. There are several of them, but they are categorized into groups. This was done by Professor William Mischer and Richard Rosrea, and they are saying that the first mechanism says that the trust to the institution is shaped independently on the institution. The trust is shaped through culture, history, and stereotypes and biases that exist in the society. Let me recall a very good statement saying that Irina said, Ukrainian nation inherited injustice. So we have this filter of perceiving judiciary as something that is not linked to a human being. But if you go to the legacy of a Soviet system, the court was an element of control over the person rather than protecting the rights of the person. So this aspect of changing or resetting stereotypes. That's the macro level of shaping trust to judiciary. And here we need to go to human rights information campaigns so that irrespective of having court experience, the person can figure out whether the decision was fair and how the court works. And the second element is the language that is clear to ordinary person. I am talking about the core decisions and reasoning of the decisions. The second element of shaping the trust to the institution, that's micro level. That's the efficiency, efficacy of the work of the institution itself. And yesterday's presentation as to sources of the communication of the Supreme Court, I can give it a hand because the interaction with a large public is much more effective and the court is becoming more open. But it's not only communication that matters here, that's also the efficiency of judges, efficiency of hearings, selection of judges, and other legal tools that are shaped by judiciary itself.
Apart from statistical data, I would probably recommend to consider behavioral patterns. Stanislav mentioned that yesterday, the number of people who come to court, who appeal against decisions, and social psychology proves that trust or distrust is subjective, but also we have behavioral indicators that are often a better illustration of attitude of the public to a certain institution. Obviously, we cannot analyze them separately. We should consider them together. Thank you. And Evhen Buderatsky, your 7 minutes. I'd like to focus on something else, but Andrei gave me this idea that I would like to focus on how people see courts, not so much about trust, but how people see courts. Mostly the judicial process, well, where there is a judicial process, those who are involved, the parties may follow that, and that's it. When people enter that where it is something hot like Nasirov or Tymoshenko, so how do they see those courts? That's how they look like. That the court is about a stuffed room, lots of people, so that transforms court into circus. So what shall we do so that they not only saw these high profile processes? Maybe it requires a bit of promotion, like at the beginning of the period of independence, Ukraine started seeing first serious about the legal profession. Unfortunately, in Ukraine, we don't have those series. So first, it was the theory of law, right? It was interesting for us to see how that is. So where, well, Yaroslav said that they brought children there and they had a different vision of those processes. We don't see that in series, in films. We see that in the media, and media respond to kind of high profile scandalous cases. And that's not always nice. And like Nasirov in a blanket, under a blanket, it is definitely something more interest than just an ordinary process that is a good process that could be a precedent, right? So all of that could be shown through things that are tangible. A series, a film, that's something that can be comprehended. Otherwise, it's difficult. It's difficult to look at lawyers, to listen to lawyers. Then they would think, maybe I won't go to that court because that's long, that's expensive, not quite clear what goes on. And then we see this trust indicators. So where you ask those people who are just lay people and those who had experience with courts, the judgments, the rates are absolutely different. So in order to transform the situation regarding trust, I believe that you need to be seen more. It seems to me that this is something that the approach that needs to be prioritized, because there are like dozens of series and films about doctors, but not about lawyers, the more so in Ukraine, especially in Ukraine. That's why Ukrainian court looks like a jury. And where people find themselves in court, they are like, so how come Pecharsky court? So people see courts only as they follow some loud, scandalous stories. So I believe that it requires popularization, promotion. So I continue speaking about the level of recognition, being more recognized by people. There was passionate reaction here, but before I let people ask a question or comment, I have a question to you, and this is about what Olga mentioned about simple idiom language. So Mr. Yurkevich and Olga used a word, and those words were not used by Yurshishin and Buderatsky. That's the individual or entity. A lawyer would never say human or person. That's entity or individual. When I ask them why, they say that's because it says so in the law, it's so stated. That's true, but imagine that you see something and you say, as I was passing the crossroads of streets, this and that, I became a witness of a traffic accident that involved a transport, a vehicle with this engine. That's not how you talk to other people, right? No, you just say that, look, that's what happened on the corner, a car crashed something, right? Well, hopefully it will not happen. So for me, role model for trust in the Ukrainian judicial system is my friend from Bobrinetsky, now it is Kropivnitsky, in district of Kirovohrad region. He's a farmer. I met him on the 8th of December 2013 in Maidan. And since then, he has the fine because he went to Yanukovych's place with after Maidan. And throughout these years, he's been appealing that decision, the decision of that court. From time to time, he comes to Kiev when he needs to come for another court session. But this person trusts the Ukrainian judicial system. And instead of going scandalous and activating people organizing demonstrations, he keeps coming to those sessions. That's trust, but often that trust is about the ideas, not only those that are forced on us. We are building trust. We want to see fair court in Ukraine, and we imagine the fair trial, fair courts, and that's how we build relationships with that. So what's required is knowledge. Then we can act as equals. If you have comments to each other among the panel participants, no, not yet. So then let me pass the floor to the audience if you want to ask a question or to express gratitude or to criticize. First you, and then I will hold the microphone. Okay, so I would like to support Yevhen there. It really resonated with me. This is high anti-corruption court, Alexei Kravchuk, that we perceive the need to popularize court in the society. As you mentioned, this could be series or some other programs where we would see the positive aspects of functioning of courts. That would be good. We analyze the symbols of courts, and we paid attention to that now in advanced countries. This has become a popular trend. There are even shops with judicial symbols on cups, on mugs. So I really like this postcard at this conference where we have the iconic building of the Supreme Court and various other courts, the Grand Chamber. And that's a good example of this kind of popularization of promotion of court symbols in positive sense, I believe. So I would suggest developing that. Thank you. Now let's proceed with you. Economic court judge. So let me express my respect to Yevhen. That's a very interesting idea. And to go on with that, I would like to say that all of us, we have the stories that we cannot really share with anyone about cases. For example, that was a long time ago where there was a case, a woman, a man and woman, they are both handsome, beautiful, and she waits for him and he doesn't come back from work, and she discusses with the neighbor that she's going to kill him. And when he comes back, she crashes a crystal vase on his head. So first she's in prison, then he also in prison for something else. Then, well, I mean, this goes on for 5.5 years. At the end of the story, me, the judge, that was 2010. I looked a bit better than now. And the daughter was sitting there and kind of flirting with me. And I realized that that girl grew up without her mother because the mother was in pre-trial facility for 5 years. I started reading the sentences of the Court of Appeal. And there it says that if the local court makes the decision, then it will be sufficient the term that she has served already would be sufficient. And I made that decision because I saw this girl growing without her mother. Well, maybe I made a mistake where I said how I made that decision, but I had that decision. You didn't name them, right? So everything is okay. Okay, thank you. I get it. Anna Adamska-Gallant, I mentioned that it is so important that courts show that courts are human, judges are human. So it would be very helpful to have films and series, books about Ukrainian judges, but it's also important that you show what you're doing. We do that in European Court for Human Rights in Poland as well, this kind of open door events. I even heard like a night in courts. So there are nights, museum nights, nights in museum in different cities. Some organize night in court, and those were hundreds of people who came to attend, to participate in that event, to see how courts work, what they look like inside. So, and that's true that all of us, we have those stories that we can discuss. This is anonymous. We do not mention names, but we speak about individuals and their stories. That's also our Polish experience. Our association of justice, maybe you know about this association, that's very powerful association that supports independence of judges. They participate in festivals. We have lots of various festivals, rock music festivals, for example, and courts come there. They have their stands where their panel discussions and they talk to people about their work. Also, meeting children, school children, so that they could see how courts work. I believe that a lot of stuff could be done there. Thank you. We have a unique situation there that they try to basically run the premises of the Supreme Court to make movies with Van Damme starring, for example. And we had that experience of inviting kids, and the kids were locked in the cell. They used the judge's hammer. And then the teachers called us and they said that most of those kids now want to be judges. So that works, really, showing the human aspect of that. Konstantin Khodorkovsky, Speaker of the Economic Court of Donetsk region. I would like to link this dichotomy, I mean the legal lingo and how journalists and humans communicate. Because for us, for judges, conventionally and legally, human people are the greatest value. And no matter what their name is, we apply that as a general value. I believe that the discussion that we have had now, and we can see the very idea of and the topic of the conference, the rule of law in times of populism. So when we speak about the rule of law, we sure need to speak about what's going to be the main regulator of social relations. And when we speak about populism, this is about something that is inaccessible to courts. We cannot play with populism because for every decision, the judge is personally accountable. And that's about personal individual responsibility where these decisions are signed and the judge is the only representative of powers. And when announcing the decision, they look into the individual's eyes. I believe that in this dichotomy between judicial authorities and the force power, branch of power, that's the media, what we lack is a mutually coordinated position and this mutual responsibility and accountability to the society. I agree with Yaroslav that we need to coordinate the idiom, the language that we talk to the public using it. If we coordinate the language, we need to speak about qualification of journalism as the fourth branch of power. I believe that it was the result of multiple faulty translations, because this originates from quatrième état in French, and that's about the fourth state. I mean, the class, the clergy, bourgeois. Then it was used in English, and there it is the fourth estate, that is to some extent about power, but above all, that's about the class. So where journalism is associated with kind of power, that gives me a sort of concern, because that's something that could entail us or impact us, and we become part of the relationships that are not characteristic of us. Anti-corruption court. When we recently interrogated the chief director of Dovzhenka film studio as a witness, they told me the story that they needed premises to resemble Paris, and they found it in Lviv. And now, despite wonderful communication of the Supreme Court, the degree of trust to the court is low, and to the judiciary it is also low, even though people may be happy with a judge's decision, but not happy with the judiciary in general. So we need to offer more to the society, we need to show more. And I believe that this can be done with the help of journalists. Thank you. Thank you. And then we will, you now, and then we will summarize. Court of Appeals, and thank you for paying attention to this concept, the person and individual. Look, today and yesterday, the lowest level of speakers was courts of appeals. And we mentioned that most people stop at the level of first instance court. So we were supposed to bring the judges, the speakers, to speak about what was happening here, and it's impossible because they are too busy. They will not come, and even organizing that online will not be possible. So these are very important activities, but we need to think about how we make it possible to we can make it possible to exchange this information. And where a judge graduates from university, they don't develop the skill of talking to journalists, but press service, the secretary of court, they know that. But unfortunately, there are financial limitations, and we don't have these experts. Unfortunately, press secretaries, and that's not just press secretaries of court, they often know how not to communicate with journalists. And some believe that that's their duty, not to communicate. I work in Dnipropetrovsk Administrative District Administrative Court. I'm a speaker judge, and I also am a professor. So I believe that an important thing is the factors that happen, that take place in court directly. And so now we have 3 times more cases under consideration of our court. And maybe for each individual, it is important to perceive the situation of justice when defending their rights. But we are first instance court, and people come often to our sessions, just ordinary citizens. And I've been working for more than 15 years. I see that when people come, they are apprehensive. They already have some bias about the court, that they won't be able to speak up, that they won't be able to express their position. And I give them time, and they are surprised that they can express their vision, that they can defend their rights. We have more than 80% of decisions that we make, these are for the benefits of the party. So, for example, we have in 85% of cases, we satisfy the claims. And the important factor is that when people come to court, they already have a certain vision that impacts trust.
Unfortunately, we cannot be fully engaged in information awareness and social type of activity. We have a lot of war veterans, and we try to tell about this to large public, that the most important thing is that people tend to come to court with their own kind of, biased opinion or stereotyped opinion. Thank you. We've used this time very effectively. Final comments. One minute. Ulia Denkovets. I'll use this minute to talk about the quality of materials. Quality is important, but it's not the key to success when it comes to trust. So the court should be an effective agent of change aimed at changing the legislation. I do understand that it is a very in-depth discussion because they don't have a legislative initiative, but the judge should have the opportunity to inform lawmaker about the deficiencies of legislation that they've discovered in practice. Ivan Burudaratsky, looking at statistics, we know that judges joined the armed forces. We are on the third year into the war, or the fourth year, and we needed this type of information. Judges are equal members of the society. Everything is very simple. So in your professional community, you will figure out what to do. But for us, for representatives of media, we needed to be able to render your complex legalese. There is a special group of journalists that follow legal news, and if that's the person who covers courts, so it takes him 7 times more time to do this piece in comparison with those who work in other fields. So that's something that requires a lot of patience and knowledge. It's difficult for you, but it's not easy for journalists either. Yurchir. I remember when entire country kept an eye on the trial. It was like a series. It was second round of elections when Yushchenko and Yanukovych were candidates. It was very high level of trust. There were high expectations that came true. The task was very difficult, but the decision was made, and it was the one that justified the expectations. We actively engage judges in drafting legislation. We do understand that you are the ones that are going to be guided by that. You are going to apply laws. So it is there. We are drafting the amendments to the civil code, and I know that Ruslan um, asked you to submit your proposals. And again, you can show this type of work as well, and you can show that judges is not the guns and reading the verdicts, but that's a very diverse life. Somebody is at the front line, somebody is helping, somebody is conducting tours to children. it's very difficult to communicate something different when you are part of the whole. That's easy. And populism is not always a negative term. It is becoming a negative when it is abused. To be popular, to gain this, you know, reputation of being popular, that's a positive thing. I don't want to have popular judges that set an example, as Olga Dankovich said, interpretation of populism. That's something that I desire and deserve rather a separate discussion. And Vitaly, it's to me that we can give it a thought and introduce at the national level a week of courts. We have a week of law, and many colleagues heard and know that we have Lessons of Justice Association developed very good movies on different legal issues. And I personally went to one of the schools and we talked to high school and prime school. And you see the eyes of the children, their emotions, their thinking, and that's a real pleasure. And everybody, teachers and the principal of the school were impressed that the judge could come and just be honest and talk about everything there. So I think we can do that. But for the time being, I invite you to come to the Supreme Court, to the Grand Chamber of the Supreme Court. We are located in Kulovsk Palace, and we have a tour there. We have open hearings, so we can arrange meetings with the judges. We'll be happy to see you there. Thank you. Don't miss the practical and specific suggestions visited the Supreme Court and what was said about the judges of the courts of the first instance and other things. And have you ever heard how the judge in British English and Wales court delivers the rulings? And have you ever noticed how they phrase it? They talk to the person in question directly and say, you disregarded your citizens' duty and failed to do that and then that, or do it differently. They just talk directly to a human being. And in our instance, we start with the introduction, that is this law, and before they get to the most important part, everybody has left. But uh, um, communication, that's what is typical British manner of doing that, is the most important thing. And that's what the panelists were talking about. We need to change the mode of our communication, because at the end of the day, justice is there and it deserves fighting for. That's another trial that was kept an eye on by the entire country. And we keep an eye on the time, and we have a break until 12. And then we have session populism as a threat to the rule of law, judicial dimension, and it's going to be
both academically and among the soft law international organizations, because when we speak about populism, we run into a very untypical phenomenon. We know what authoritarianism is, what totalitarianism is, what true democracy is, but what populism is remains a subject to very heated discussions. The problem is that, unlike authoritarianism, that directly denies the key principles, and unlike real democracy that complies with the basic principles, populism does not negate them, but it works inside the system, inside a democracy, by exploiting certain emotional factors, expectations for simple solutions. It exploits those conditions of atomized human being living in a postmodern society. If we look at it in a more global way, I like this three wave theory, which says that during the beginning of the 21st century, our civilization found itself in three waves of democratization as well as spread of authoritarianism. And look here, that was the first wave of democratization after the First World War, and the first wave of authoritarianism before the Second World War. And now, if we look at this chart, we find ourselves at the third wave of authoritarianism. In other words, we are now speaking about certain global processes, the processes that are characteristic not only of the Ukrainian society, that are a part of the historic rationale. And I'm very happy that today we will be discussing those issues. It's a great honor for me to introduce the participants of this last discussion. That's Hanna Damska-Galant, judge of the European Court of Human Rights, Mykola Hnatovsky, judge of the European Court of Human Rights, Ivan Mishchenko, judge of the Commercial Court of Cassation within the Supreme Court, and Anatoly Miroshnichenko, who's with us online, and Andrei Rybachuk, secretary of the Cassation Administrative Court with the Supreme Court. Now, these panelists are not accidental, as you see. We have the honor and a chance to look at this problem from many sides, from the judicial self-governance angle, from the Supreme Court, and from the European Court of Human Rights. The structure of our discussion is going to take place within three sections, where we would give about 4 minutes to each of our participants. And I will try to be as strict as Mr. Kulikov was, who is looking at me in an encouraging way, I hope. And we will speak about three key blocks of issues. First of all, populism as a modern phenomenon, the collective trauma of populism, the issues that are characteristic of the Ukrainian society and that we will have for many more years to come. And we will try to have a look at what institutional and legal guarantees there are for independence of the judiciary. So if those populist risks are not removed, at least they could be minimized. So populism is a modern phenomenon. The difference between populism and authoritarianism, we have touched upon it slightly. The problem is that this is an unseen enemy. We cannot identify it at once because it does not reject democratic institutions, it does not reject courts, but by absolutizing the will of the people, what is happening are very dangerous things. Democracy is that the vision of the future is formed via a dialogue, a political compromise, a democratic process. Populism rejects that, and that's the problem because the vision of the future is imposed, as happened in Poland during Prawo and Sprawiedliwość, as it's happening in Hungary, as is happening in the United States. What it leads to? It leads not only to consolidation of power, and for that reason, we see attacks against the judicial system. We will talk about why it is happening, because as we understand the logic, we should produce an antidote. Why populism is dangerous for the judiciary. I'd like to talk with you, dear colleagues, as part of this discussion and in this circle, within this cycle of our issues, to ask you to think about two important aspects of our discussion. First is whether we can think that populism is a transitional form between democracy and authoritarianism, or is it a phenomenon itself with a different trajectory of development, and how populism is reflected in the judicial system via expectations of quick justice and the pressure upon the justice. And I will probably ask to all of you to give us a more global dimension. And let's start with Mykola Gnatowski. Thank you, Alexander. Speaking about the global dimension of populism, I tend to agree with the idea that it is really, if it is not a transitional stage, it has the potential of turning a democracy into authoritarianism, into tyranny, as our antique writers taught us. And the biggest problem that democracy has is that the thought of the majority, without taking into account the ideas of the minority in various its dimensions, almost inevitably leads to degradation of all the political structure and of the system. So when we look at the motto of the Council of Europe, one of the organizations that has joined this conference, we see there democracy, rule of law, human rights, or human rights, rule of law, democracy. And the three of them have to come together. If one of them is missing, they cannot stay functional. I'm sorry for saying such basic things, but I think we should start with that. What are we talking about when we talk about the position of the minority and the role of courts in that? Who is the minority? Well, at once we think about ethnic minorities or other minorities, people who have some special features according to the statistic majority. Because although, once again, that's quite a tricky thing because every person has many different features. And as when we discussed our sociological studies, we could see that there was a wonderful explanation that a certain general idea is formed that does not come down to the totality of the thoughts of every person who was polled. It's a kind of a total mythical abstract majority, a general mythic standard that dictates its attitude to all the others. So who is there? Yes, perhaps these are the people who do not comply with those standards, people with a different color of skin, people who have other gender identification, some other options. However, in the same way, within that system and in a systemic way, we see, for example, a party, the defendant in the criminal process. A usual person who is accused of a criminal offense would always find oneself in a weak situation compared to the government. There would always be this disbalance of power. And here the society demands justice, the society demands that this person be punished. And all those procedural guarantees, all the criminal procedural code or the criminal aspect of the sixth article of the European Convention of Human Rights, it has one of its global objectives is to somehow balance up this disbalance. And populism strikes directly there. We can see that in other categories of cases, on some kind of a social security issues, pensions. Populism will still be there. In civil cases, it's not always there, but such scenarios cannot be excluded. So even in that, it is there. And that's the pressure that the judges have to respond to. And I believe that that's the global aspect of it. Thank you. Thank you for staying within the timeline. Anna, please, yesterday we met at the hotel and we exchanged a couple of words about this discussion we're going to have today. You then remembered a very interesting thing about techno-feudalism, the concept that is very popular today in the academic circles and social circles and Western literature. What do you think? Those questions, isn't the growth of populism related to the development of technologies? Thank you very much for that question. In general, thank you very much for the subject of this panel. I think it is important because, first of all, I want to say that I agree with the idea that populism can be a stage that can jeopardize democracy and that eventually can create a new system, more authoritarian one. Because when we speak about populism, that's always a division. On the one side, there are people, the population. On the other side, there is the elite. And populism is always against the elite. And we see that the judges are part of the elite because they're well educated, they have real power. And now, what is also very important, populism always proposes simple solutions to complicated problems. And what has been said here, I believe and I agree that we can read it in many studies that populism is so strong today and becomes stronger thanks to various platforms, social media that multiplicate those simple solutions, disseminate them. And those platforms, this technological development, it strives to exclude dialogue, which is an element of every democracy. And I think you see all that. We now live in some kind of information bubbles. We receive, thanks to the algorithms, only some information. And there is no exchange of thoughts. There is no space for compromise. There is no space for a center. If there is no center, there is no democracy. And I think that this is a big danger. And as we talked about it yesterday, as we look at those big platforms, on the one hand, for the owners of those platforms, that's business people from the United States, we have to say that directly, and they have their own ideology. They are earning money. For them, a participant of social media is not a participant of any debate, it's a consumer. And there is always a question of monetization. There is also this problem, always. And I believe that that's a real big threat for democracy. It's almost unlimited possibility for those platforms to influence the discourse and the information that we receive. And one more thing, when we talk about the stage, you've said it already about the experience of Poland. We've had that experience of populism for 8 years. Then the new government came to power, which is less populist. But what we see in Poland, and unfortunately that is also true for Ukraine, we see that this populism is now more present even with this government, because this more democratic government, it sees that this populist idea has support in the society and it has to be disseminated. Unfortunately, I can say this about, for example, the attitude to Ukrainians in Poland, which can change. But again, we're talking about the influence of the social media and the fact that the social media that distribute, disseminate some kind of negative opinions about the situation. And the risk is high. I think that about 3 weeks ago, we had a situation in Poland when 19 drones came to Poland. And can you imagine that 38% of the people in Poland accused Ukraine for those drones? How can it be possible? But it shows how powerful those social media are and fake news. Sorry for taking a bit more time. Well, thank you, Anna. You paid attention to a very important issue. Even if a society has overcome a populist regime, but the effects are still there and they still affect the political milieu. Ivan, a question to you. We will yet talk about the specificity of Ukraine. But don't you think that with us, the disease of populism is not only present, it has always, we've always had it since the times of independence. Thank you for giving me this chance. Well, I will perhaps follow up on what Anna said. Now, what do you think? What is the main movie of the 21st century? It's a question that was asked to American film critics, and they answered in a very simple way. It's a social media by David Fincher about Mark Zuckerberg, who created Facebook. Why is that the main movie of the 21st century? Because it's the movie about how the reality came to exist in which we all live. And this reality is that boy who created Facebook, he created it because he was alone, because his girlfriend ditched him. And we see at the end of the movie that he never got her back, although he had got 500 million friends. I believe that the emergence of social media made populism very strong, unseen before, and an unseen resource, with the help of which everyone has the right of voice. Everyone can use comments and write whatever one wants to. Any post, mention each of us in any context. Well, unfortunately, most often negative one. And for me, the main question within this context is whether or maybe a threat is that the judiciary, the judicial system, they should find such a format of communication in order not to be entangled in this fight where we will definitely lose. Remember, ask yourself a simple question, and maybe you have this experience. Well, Vasil definitely has it. For example, some kind of your decision is criticized in Facebook, and try to make your own comment to defend your position, and we'll see what the result would be. There is no sense in that. However, we have to somehow defend our positions because that's your decision. You believe that it's correct and it has the right to exist and it has solved some legal problem. So, should we become a part of this populist discourse? And what form of communication should we look for that will meet what we are, that will reflect what we were? Well, the previous panel, and I will try to link it to the one we have now. What do you think? Why uh, they don't make movies about judges? If you think about that, you will not remember almost a single movie where a judge is the main character. There are no such movies at all. There are movies about the judicial system, about trials, about defense counsels, about prosecutors, and even about the experts. but not about judges. Well, maybe those of you who watch a lot of movies, you would say, but there is a movie called Judge with Robert Downey Jr., right? But there, the judge is the secondary character because the main character is his son, a defense counsel, played by Robert Downey Jr. Why they don't make movies about us? Well, the evident answer from the point of filmmakers is that because unfortunately or fortunately we don't have the so-called uh, movie making dynamics because it's impossible to render with a film the process of decision making because a lawyer sees somebody, gets read some documents. Well, the judges are sitting in his room, he's reading something or writing. How can we render it on film? And the other reason, the ethical one, I believe, is that incidentally, the second category of people about which there are almost no movies, but a little bit more than us, that's priests. There are also very few movies about priests where priests are the main characters because the society, any general society treats judges and priests as a kind of an ideal, as people with an absolute category of moral values. And I believe that this is the reason when we speak about those high figures of mistrust to the judicial system, they can be explained by the fact that when judges make a mistake, that's twice or three times more painful for a society rather than when this is done by other categories of people because the discrepancy between how they imagine us to be and what sometimes real and happens in real life not always favors us.
Well, thank you for bringing up this sacral legacy because this is indeed a profession that came up um, in the ancient times. Andriy, you are working with social rights. It's also represented in our constitutional court. And I think that would be um, the area where there is most populism. This is a definition made by journalists. They say that the majority of social decisions were made with regard to populism. Well, thank you. When I was getting ready for our today's meeting, I was trying to understand what is populism to me. Alexander just mentioned that this is a sort of a transition between democracy and autocracy, or is it something else completely? And I tried to look at specific cases to better understand the nature of this phenomenon. I believe this is not a, a separate ideology, it's more of a strategy. And all classic definitions that I managed to find from research, there isn't much of them, but they all come down to a classical understanding of this phenomenon. It's this sort of an opposition between elites and um, regular people. It's a hidden concept um, which implies deconstruction of democratic institutions, and populists use that to get to their aims. If we were to link that to some specific events that bring up this phenomenon, what is this fertile soil that allows populism to grow? And I am with Alexandra on this, saying that it's different social events and phenomenon. This is the fertile soil for the populists that they will eventually use in the future. It means that we need to think of ways to minimize it. It's not only specific for the transformation periods or the war, and that is a special challenge for us. Let's try to analyze the Ukrainian historical experience. Then, I believe, the roots go back to the 1990s when we were going through certain transformations. The Soviet Union collapsed. That was a big um, structure that declared their love to the citizens. They declared a certain social standards. However, it wasn't real. It was just on paper and in words. However, the citizens grew up with this idea that the state takes care of everything and the rights of the citizens, human rights. This is the responsibility of the state. But nothing like that existed. When an independent state arose, nothing changed. I ask myself why nothing has changed. Simply because the people who stay at power are the same people who were making decisions as part of a different state structure. And it's only now that we see certain processes that are not exactly populist, and yet, whatever happens now is caused by what happened before. Since the 1990s, populists were using manipulative technologies to get the love of the masses, and to change the situation overnight and to come out of this challenge is impossible. You cannot have a simple solution for a complex problem. Since the 1990s, every political power who was preparing for an election tried to be loved by the people, and that was by the adoption of laws and acts, social benefits. And I can give you numerous examples of that. Either it was about the pensions or special pensions, or the categories of people who were born during the war. Everyone was promising something and never thought about how to fulfill those promises. If we go deeper into this and analyze how those laws were adopted, the populace would suggest changes or a law that would promise benefits to a certain category of people. And that was always commented by the experts, by the research institutions, that this would have negative repercussions. I have read conclusions saying categorically you cannot adopt such a law because the state simply does not have resources to keep that promise, but that never stopped the people who adopted those laws. And now we come to a time when the financial resources of the state budget, especially in the times of a war, when all the funds should go to defense and security, there is no possibility to keep to those obligations. And now the government and the parliament has quite an impossible a challenge. How do we keep stability in the society under such circumstances? The statement that courts are regulators of social stability is always relevant. And for now, the courts are keeping up with the task. I think you just mentioned quite an important thing, the social issues. And let's look at the social issues from the point of view of democracy. What is democracy? It's the decisions made by the people. And who are the people? Independent, aware, smart, and well-informed citizens. If a large amount of our population is dependent on the state through such populist actions, we are losing democracy. A great amount of our population ceases to be citizens, and they play along all these populist things. Anatoly, are you with us? Yes, I'm here. Welcome, Anatoly. It's apparent that this type of populism had its effect on the judicial system. This portion of the negative moods translates itself into people going to courts and complaining and expecting something. Can you see the way how this populism from the 1990s makes us captives of the changes in the future? Well, thank you for that question. I have a special view on that. The way I see it, okay, let me put it. Source of democracy. Do you remember the fate of Socrates? And his fate is very much linked to the notions of democracy, populism, and justice. Socrates was convicted unfairly, as we all know now. However, it was done as part of a very democratic court proceedings. So populism has been around democracy since a very long time. And we can give examples like that from any epoch. We cannot say that democracy will end at some point and then the populism will begin. I think populism will always be existing alongside democracy if there is a skew towards the power of majority. I liked the words of a previous speaker who said democracy is values. We are used to the definition that the democracy is the power of majority when the majority gives their votes. However, democracy is values and the rule of law. Without them, democracy will be nothing than a group of cannibals deciding who would be the first to be served for dinner today. So there is this permanent opposition between the power of majority and what we believe to be democratic values today. If such a disbalance exists, it could lead to such unfair decisions, like in the example of Socrates. So, generally, unintelligent and short-lived decisions. However, if populism is a disease of democracy, you can prevent it, you can treat it, and I believe the prevention and treatment of that disease is moving the balance to meritocracy, so that the decisions are made by thinking and smart people, intelligent people, and independent people. I think we already has done a lot to do that. Look at the procedure of appointing independent judges. There are 15 steps in that process. It is a meritocratic selection already. It could be improved. However, if we compare the selection of judges and the election of the parliamentaries, that would be two different worlds. It's very hard to treat a general condition of a body, and by body we mean our political system. And it's very important to treat just one organ. If the infection is in the body, you cannot just treat a leg or an arm. And that means we have work to do, not only within the judicial system, but the more changes we have in the political mechanism, the less will we have examples mentioned by Andriy. There will be more rationality in the decisions. And we could speak about some general things or some limitations to the passive voting right. If the convicted felons were never elected, then we would never have had Hitler, Mussolini, and Yanukovych. And if we are not speaking about the limitations, but rather publishing the tests that those candidates are passing, then the voters would have a much easier time making decisions on who they are electing into the parliament. And we need to treat the disease overall. Thank you. You just draw our attention to a very interesting thing, and you also answered the question that we had on our slides. Is populism a contemporary phenomenon? Could we go back to that slide? Those slides were prepared not just in the corporate colors of the Constitutional Court of Ukraine, but also in the motive of the ancient Greece, because all those phenomena are old. The meritocracy always also comes from Greece. It was an attempt to be implemented, but it did not lead to anything. It just led to another revolution against the aristocracy. Well, democracy is generally an interesting historical phenomenon for the ancient Greece. Let's move back. Let's move now to the second question, which is more specific to Ukraine. We spoke about the global tendency, the technology, the impact of social media. However, the Ukrainian case is very special. We have a war going on. And we can now speak about society having and living through a post-traumatic stress disorder. We need to do something about it. We need to treat it. We need to work with it. On the other hand, this is also a very fertile soil for populism, because collective trauma lowers the critical thinking. And we saw that at the beginning of the war. And now this majority could be exploited by politicians to reach their goals. This is something you can build you can grow your political capital on. Let's be frank about it. And there is another issue that we never speak about. Are the judges free from those populist influences? Is it possible that we sometimes fall into a trap of sticking to the law on one things and the social emotions that we share? Why don't we try to talk about these painful questions. And I give the floor to Ivan. Could you tell us a little bit about the PTSD in society as a source of possible populist threats, and what can we do with that?
By all means, we live in the trauma of war. And unfortunately, this will stay with us for a long time. And by all means, populism as an instrument of seizing power within this context will be very much in demand. I think we had a brief conversation, and as we discussed this session, we remembered at once guys will come from the trenches, will bring back order. We've heard these things. It has not worked. But nobody's paying attention to that, and I'm sure that we will hear this argument again and again. We now hear another argument that sooner or later we'll have an election campaign and the military will participate in it, and people are already thinking of some parties of the military officers and so on. And of course, this will become more popular. Although, to be frank, these are completely different things. Andrei, I think, said a very important term within this context, paternalism. Now, this story of populism exploits paternalism because paternalism is when you have somebody big and strong and smart who can quickly solve all your problems, all of them. And you don't have to worry about anything anymore because there is this big man who will take everything upon himself. So, by all means, the only medicine in this situation, as it has already been mentioned, if we associate this with a disease, is growing up. Because this paradox of a collective war trauma is that we all have grown up seriously, and our children have grown up after all those years. And on the other hand, the lowered plank of critical thinking and fast emotional responses make us all children in a way because we really want somebody to come and to solve all of our difficult problems while logical understanding that this is impossible and it will not happen tomorrow or the day after. That's why education, professional communication, growing up, bringing higher our intellectual cultural level of ourselves and of the society and of the legal cultural level because all those millions of cases that are pending in the courts that they can lead to a situation where people that go to the court, yes, to see their problems solved, of course, but after that they become a little better. Thank you. Thank you, Andrei. Yes, I agree completely with Ivan. The war, collective war trauma, that's a strong emotion. And populists, like any other manipulator or fraudsters, we can remember them as well. They always parasite with strong emotions. When an emotion is strong, then your wisdom is turned off and the decisions are then made based on emotions. This is what is a huge threat. And that's our common task to think about how those emotions should not grow into such effects, such conclusions for those who will be guided by emotions rather than by wisdom in decision making. And that's about the level of consciousness in the society, of legal culture, of legal traditions. We either have it or we don't. I don't remember who said that, but it's an issue that the question does not require an answer. Whether one can enter a legal tradition, probably not. You have to be born into it. You have to take over from somebody else. I think it's impossible. That's why it's important that we do something along this road. Today, we have remembered the Soviet imperialist past. Almost all of us present here, except for the youngest ones, they were all born in the Soviet past, and our mentality was formed with some under some narratives present at those time and that society, and we have to review that, revise it, and to get rid of that. And it's not accidental that we're having this at the university, because the academia also has a lot of responsibility for overcoming those Soviet effects and for changing the mentality of the young generation that tomorrow will be building our country and will be fighting those populist challenges. Right. Well, it gives us a challenge how to ensure this justice between generations. And now, the war has caused and is causing and will be causing a serious trauma in the Ukrainian society. We understand that already. It's true that we have to create some kind of antidote so that this trauma would not grow into what happened in Italy in 1922, so it would not turn into the processes that took place in Germany in 1933. And even I know well the history of Poland, but the pre-war Poland also suffered from the same war effects. Now, what do you think that we can find some kind of antidote against this post-war populism caused by the war trauma? I think that it's a very difficult question. I think that in general, populism grows the most where you have the feeling of danger, the feeling of a threat, of a loss. And as we see that with the example of Ukraine and those other countries you've mentioned, after this First World War, people had the feeling of a loss, of a threat, and that people were left without themselves. And there are risks here. It's a natural need to look for somebody strong who will propose those simple solutions. As we see it in general, if we look at what is happening in the world, in general, the situation is very complicated because there are many things that several years ago could not even be imagined. You remember COVID? Nobody thought that it would be possible that one can, lock up the world for because of a certain virus. We never thought that there could be a war in Ukraine. And also, as we see, the populism is growing in all countries now. We see that in the European Union, in every country, there is a certain populist party, AfD in Germany, the Dem in France, and all of them are growing. And I think there is a lot of responsibility for those political forces that understand what democracy means, that understand what values mean. Like in Germany, there is always a kind of a space, empty space around this AfD that no single political party would ever form a government together with this AfD. But I'm afraid this is changing. And here I agree with my colleagues because you've underlined the importance of education. And this is very significant. And here we have a positive example of Finland because they understand very well those threats. related to populism. They understand very well the threats related to information manipulation, and they start training their children, teaching them so the children would understand how to differentiate between the facts and so that they would know how to check them. But frankly, I don't have a good answer to that question. Thank you, Anna. Mr. Knatovsky, your reflections, possibly. Well, judges, they also have to stay together, during the war, before the war, because there are bombings and dangers for them, and it affects them. And what do you think? Is there any advice to us so that we don't come down into emotional decision making? Thank you very much for this question, which brings us back to the judicial dimension of our conversation. But the previous discussion has shown, that all the things that my colleagues have said, and I agree with all of them, I think that the judiciary would never be independent from a society. A judge never lives in that ebony tower. Never. And it's important for a judge to find this balance that is very fine. And I think it can only be felt. I don't even know a formula can be designed there between not looking a servant of those public trends, including populist trends, the ones that potentially can bring up problems, but let's say, and the social moods. They may not necessarily be bad, but the moods. And at the same time, remain authentic, remain a representative of the authority, legitimate authorities for the society that is not getting lost. Because if a judge is completely isolated from the society and try to judge only by the book without taking into account what is happening around them, then the result will definitely be a problem. If a judge monitors every movement of the wind in the same way, there will be a problem. So this balance is extremely difficult. And as you correctly are saying, the Ukrainian judges, and that's because the Ukrainian judges are part of the Ukrainian society, and I would say a wonderful part of the Ukrainian society, they live through all of that in the same way. We see Ukrainian judges at the front line. We see Ukrainian judges who remained as civilians. They died because of the enemy attacks. And their houses have been destroyed in the same way as the houses of people who are not judges. And they also found themselves in the situations where they would have to move away from the regions hit by the war, to evacuate their families, their children, and then go back to their courthouses. We have all that. And this combination of the traumatic shock and post traumatic syndrome, which we have at the same time because the full scale work has been going on for almost 4 years. We know not when it will end. This is becoming more and more traumatic. And of course, it affects the judges. So eventually, I believe that we cannot be completely deaf to what is happening around us. Please note, I don't want to get back to the general political discussion because I'm not sure that we, as lawyers and as judges, are in the best position to discuss these things. But note, politicians, modern politicians in Ukraine and outside of it, frankly don't believe that populism is a bad thing, even if they're not saying this openly, but they don't think that it's a bad thing. In the best case, they think that yes, populism as such is bad, especially if your opponent is a populist and not you. However, okay, now we will promise everything to everybody. We will now take the road of meeting all the interests that there can be. But we are a smart people, we're educated people. We have read Plato and Aristotle. We know something that when we take power, we will govern in a smart way. We will now dupe them collectively, then we will take power, and then we start governing in a reasonable way. It never happens so because they, yes, as Anatoly have said it correctly, they don't take 15 stages of selection, but they take other stages of selection. So just like the judges who have taken all those circles of hell, well, of selection to get to their positions, they will never be independent from the society in the same way. Some of them believe that they can govern the country if they constantly poll public opinion, and if they move where they think that people are taking them, that they're not agents of change, but they're following the wave. Some of them never thought so, but they're still not free from the society. We're not free. None of us. I don't have a better recipe than one Ivan has suggested. Education, making good things popular, promoting them. And this is what I think all of these discussions are leading us to. I won't suggest anything else. The only thing I believe is that we have to clearly say that this positive agenda that explains what is good and what is not very good, this can be conscious activity, and it should be proactive, because now it's mostly reactive. We're attacked, the judiciary are attacked by populists, and okay, we will appoint a speaker judge and make them try to explain it. I think that this should be done a different way. This balance should be shifted toward the more proactive work, demanding this from the judiciary that has a million cases, that is overburdened. The first instance, the second instance judges, we have too few of them, that have inhuman working conditions, inhuman workloads. It's impossible. It's not realistic. It will not work. But at least the Supreme Court gives us a good example of how this can be done. The Constitutional Court is doing this quite consistently as well. Perhaps, the system, as we try to reform it from the top, maybe again, this can be done from the top. Thank you. Thank you. Well, Mikola, you touched upon a very interesting thing that I also wanted to bring up. But why populists, when they take power, the very first thing that they do, they attack the judicial system? What do you think? That's not a fast solution. We said that populists, they're not against democracy, they're not against separation of powers. They just want to impose their own point of view to everybody. And why under populist regimes or populist governments, the very first victim is the courts, Supreme Courts, constitutional courts, the judicial system in general, because the function of a court in a democracy is to manage the political process, not to allow it to get out of the shores and of the lines and frontier imposed as established by the Constitution. Democracy as a process for developing the future. Populists don't need that. Populists impose their own vision. And for that vision to be imposed, they need to remove that preventive obstacle that is not allowing them to do that. And this obstacle is what? We, the judicial system.
We are now coming to the end of our time. And our third question is about the independence of judges and guarantees for that. And here I would like to change the course of our discussion and offer the answer to the audience. Why don't you try to answer a few questions? What could be the guarantees, the safeguard safeguards against populists, so that democracy, whenever populists come to power, does not uh, become an autocracy, remains a democracy. And simply because we have quite an interactive discussion here, I would like to invite our dear colleagues in the audience to speak. When populists speak about the people, or when the Constitution speaks about the people, who are they? Is populism really a dangerous phenomenon? Well, we have just established that it has existed alongside democracy since its first days. We are living, and our previous generations have lived under the shadow of populism. What are the possible effective safeguards against it? Because when we speak about the protection of a judicial system, not for the sake of the judicial system, not because we are so wonderful. We speak about the judicial system guaranteeing the democracy, its a functional definition. And finally, how do we provide a balance again between social expectations and independence of the judiciary? When the institutional machine is vulnerable, you didn't give me the floor during the last panel. I want to use my opportunity now. I will go back to those questions. However, I had this feeling of sadness over the past 2 days because it's a sort of a deja vu. Populism, trust to power, free speech, independence of the judiciary. We have discussed this 20 years ago. I talked to Ludmila Opreshko during the break. I talked to Pankratov in the break yesterday. We have done so much since the early 2000s. But what is the result? We have had trainings for journalists, to judges, and now I can see a change of a generation. Everyone we trained and taught back then. I've been a judge since 1993, and every time something changes and there are populist decisions, what happens? A judicial reform. And who are under attack? The courts. There is distrust to the court. Let's change it. Let's evaluate it. Let's reload it. If the court is not comfortable, let's cancel it, let's liquidate it. And populism is spreading wider and wider, and it will become even wider whenever people who defended uh, our freedom with their blood will go back homes, and in a post-war period, we will need to renew the limitations of rights we have now during the war. This is what the Constitutional Court does. He needs to balance the limitations of constitutional rights and the preservation of the state. We did not come together here in vain because we need to work through all of that and be prepared. The indicator of trust. Let's imagine an individual getting a fair judgment, a fair ruling. However, Irena was very right to say that person still does not trust the court. That person believes his case was an an exemption from the circumstances. He was lucky to have a good judge. We need to prove that this is a general rule. That is why I call upon all of us to develop a systemic, comprehensive approach. I have already invited Yevhen to take part in my online um, education project. It will begin in April, and it's initiated by the Constitutional Court and the School of Judges. Last week, the Venice Committee paid attention to the fact that Ukraine received 121 opinions from the Venice Committee, while Czech Republic received zero. Uh, well, you might not like it, but I'm used to not being liked. This is an evidence of the fact that some of our institutions take the path of caution. They want to get an opinion from the Venice Commission in order to implement their reforms and to prepare the society to a certain opinion. We have to do whatever we can at our own place. I understand we all have a lot of work, but this is not just about judges, it's about researchers and psychologists, because we need to melt that ice of distrust between the judiciary and the journalism. I'm sorry, please give me one more minute. It's not the court that shapes the people's opinion about the courts. It's social media and regular media, the populist slogans, which means we need to change our approach. We need to organize psychological trainings to mount that distrust between journalists and judges. We need to repeat what has already been done. Volodymyr Kravchuk started to teach constitution in kindergartens and primary schools. We need to expand that, and let's think what we can do. I'm happy every Monday and Friday to give lectures to journalists on how to talk to judges. I am done. Thank you. I couldn't interrupt you. You were so passionate about it. Vyacheslav, you're welcome. Vyacheslav Navrotsky, professor at UKU. I'm going to criticize you, not to flatter you. You said that one of a component of populism is instant justice. I think this is incorrect. Everyone who has pets at home know if a cat or a dog does something bad on Monday, there is no use reminding them about that on a Friday. Now, why is justice so far away from us? Why, whenever journalists write about a trial, they will normally say a long proceeding or something. I'm not talking about all the trials, but only about the criminal justice. The 1960 Criminal Code included the principle of continuity. If one judge began the case, he, he or she was supposed to continue with it. And if you violated that principle, your judgment could be canceled. We had the same principle in the draft code that I was part of preparing. Then it was transferred to the administration of the president, and Mr. Portnow gave it to two young experts, and this principle was taken out of it. And now we have quite a resonant case on the assassination of Irina Farion. The case sits once in 2 weeks or once in a month. Why can't we bring back that principle of continuity? I mean, nothing else could be done in between them unless the prosecutor's office looks for more evidence or witnesses, which is again not exactly according to the law. So you can get a fair ruling. I received that ruling in 7 months instead of 10 days. And however, before that, I was a person under the administrative fine. When I had to go on a holiday, I had to withdraw cash because I was afraid of my accounts being blocked, and a fast decision would return the belief that the court is fair. And by the way, you are potential witnesses in my claim where I am going to say that I suffered moral damage from all those actions. You are absolutely right. There should be a balance between a speed ruling and a fair ruling. However, in the context of populism, it's more about the emotional ruling because speed in this context, well, you remember that biblical story, crucify him, crucify him. So whenever we are talking about fast rulings in the context of populism, I see we are uh, going beyond our time frame because we want to make up for the time we spent waiting for you. And now I would like to invite our panelists to summarize our discussion. And I invite Anatoly to begin. Are you still with us? Yes, I'm here. You are welcome. Could you please give a summary of everything we have discussed today? Thank you. Populism is, of course, a dangerous disease, and war causes quite strong emotions in a society. Those strong emotions increase the risks that these moods will be used by populists. However, in the times of threat, we can expect the people making decisions at any governmental level, but also in the judicial system, we can expect that some populist statements will be abandoned because we are now talking about the survival of our state and our nation. It has happened before in history that danger pushed people to take not populist and unpopular, however, correct decisions. I believe this will happen in Ukraine. Thank you, Anatoly. You brought up a very important thing. Naomi Klein, in her doctrine of shock, said that extraordinary circumstances create an environment enabling fast but also deep and effective reforms. And I think this is a moment that could be used both for the good and for the bad. Thank you for bringing it up. Andri, dear colleagues, when you're informed, it means you are armed. In order to overcome those negative consequences from populism, we need to understand the nature of that phenomenon. We need to correct our methods of fighting it and adjust them to the behavior of other people. Thank you. I have two thoughts on that. I believe in the US Senate, There are currently 14 bills in the pipeline that need to reform, that will reform the US judicial system. This is a follow-up of what you said. I think by some coincidence, the majority of acts of the current administration are being cancelled at the level of federal courts. So I think there is a certain link between those parliament bills and that. And now I started to find an opposite word to populism: rationalism, systemic pragmatism. And thank you for your words. I think that the opposite to populism is the court system, the judicial system. Anna, I would like to go back to your previous question about the safeguards to the judicial system. And I believe there are no safeguards. And when the the populists come to power, they do their own business. And the first thing they do is cancel the constitutional court like we had in Poland. We thought we are safe in Poland because we are in the EU, but it doesn't work like that. And we can see that in our country. Another thing I want to say, the judicial system, the judicial power was partly engaged in that process. And I'm being pessimistic about it. But I believe there will always be courts that would like to join and to use a situation like that in order to advance or promote themselves. I'm sorry I have such a negative summary. No, I don't think it's negative. It's objective. Thank all our participants for their thoughts and words. Anatoly, thank you for joining us online. Thank you. And let's believe in the best.